Welcome to the Second Half Stewardship Podcast. We believe that God owns it all, and our response as Christians is to live generous lives. I'm Spencer Hall, a certified financial planner.
And I am Austin McLaughlin. As former full-time missionaries in the United States and overseas, Spencer and I approach managing our personal finances through the lens of biblical stewardship.
Journey with us as we explore how to be generous stewards of our money, time, relationships, gifts, and experiences. Welcome back to Second Half Stewardship. Today we're excited to welcome a special guest to the podcast, Peter Greer. A little bit about Peter. He is the president and CEO of Hope International, a global Christ-centered economic development organization serving throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. Prior to joining Hope, Peter worked internationally as a microfinance advisor in Cambodia and Zimbabwe, and as managing director for Owego Bank in Rwanda. He received a BS in international business from Messiah University and an MPP in political and economic development from Harvard's Kennedy School. Peter has written 15 different books and has garnered a bunch of different awards with those. And he has a couple of friends who he worked with to recently write a book that has been deeply impactful for Austin and I, a book called Lead with Prayer, which we're excited to dive into with him a little bit later on in the podcast. The book has an amazing array of stories and resources to help us all go deeper in our relationship with God through prayer. We're excited to talk with Peter today, first, though, about Hope International and his writing this most recent book and what it looks like to actually implement those practices in leading with prayer. So, Peter, again, we're thrilled to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for carving out time to join us.
Great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Well, Peter, we've touched on Hope International a couple times with our audience. We've mentioned you guys a couple times in passing in different episodes. And some of our clients, some of the listeners may have heard about Hope International from us before. But for those that haven't, we'd love for our audience just to get to know Hope a little bit better. So how did you get involved with Hope? Tell us a little bit about the mission and vision.
I love talking about Hope International. So thanks for the invitation. But yeah, so I grew up with this interest in business and entrepreneurship. And I also had this interest in global missions, and some of the most formative experiences of my life were traveling around and learning and really understanding what an amazing world we live in, and understanding different cultures and people. But there was one trip in particular that I can point to and say that was the moment that these two interests intersected, this interest in business entrepreneurship and this interest in global missions. And it was when I was studying in Moscow, it would have been 1995. And it was after the fall of the Soviet Union. And there was an individual that I met with while I was there studying. And it wasn't some sort of big grand meeting. It just was a meal together. But he described how he was doing economic development at that moment in time. And I came alive. Like, you're telling me there's a way to use these business skills and entrepreneurship and access to capital and do it in such a way that you're building the local church and strengthening the local economy and addressing not just physical poverty, but spiritual poverty as well. I am all in. So that moment changed everything in terms of career direction. Ended up graduating from college and then ended up getting a job in internal controls and fraud prevention with World Relief. Started in Cambodia in a rural branch office. And I mean, so many stories from that time, but literally going and being in the homes of families, learning about the reality of poverty and that it is possible to see meaningful progress. And it is possible to see churches strengthened and people on the move in these communities. And then went to Rwanda, ran a microfinance bank there for 3 years, and then Zimbabwe and microfinance in a hyperinflationary environment. But really, it's all been different environments, but the same theme. How do we use the tool of investment capital for those that typically don't get invested into? And how do we do it in such a way that we strengthen the local church and address not just the kind of breaking intergenerational poverty, but doing it in such a way that individuals hear about Jesus. So that's what I've been doing in my career, and then joined Hope in 2004. So 20 years in that I've been here with Hope International, and we're now in 24 countries and just past 3 million families that we've been able to serve and invest in. And it's been an absolute joy to be part of this global mission. So that's the journey that I've been on.
Awesome. Well, what I love, I think, about Hope in particular is we hear about microfinance. Let's give loans to the poorest of the poor and help them escape out of poverty, alleviate their place of poverty. And then you hear missions and church planting, and let's go and reach the poorest of the poor and reach the unreached. What I love about Hope is that it's really a blend of two. And even as we sat with you guys a couple of weeks ago, hearing some stories from the field, it is that beautiful blend of we're not just going to meet a tangible need and we're not just going to go plant churches, but it's really how do you embody both of those? So as you think about the mission of Hope International, what are things that you get really excited about?
Austin, I so appreciate that and what you just shared, because that totally is the heart of Hope. And yes, there are lots of organizations doing economic development, and yes, there's lots of organizations that are finding ways of sharing the hope of Christ, and we're trying to figure out, well, let's bring those two together. And in many ways, this is the historical precedent of the church. Ironically, it is relatively recent history that we have needed to rediscover some of these tools. Did you know William Carey, when he was one of these pioneering missionaries for the whole missions movement, he used a grassroots form of economic development. He used savings groups as part of his outreach in India because he said people in poverty, and unless there's financial literacy and job creation, they're always going to be in poverty. So let's use some of these tools. And we look at the history of the church, and it's a relatively recent thing that we have separated our service to the poor from our proclamation of good news. Those two things historically were joined, and we're saying, let's rediscover. Let's bring them together and watch how powerful it is when we do both. So I really appreciate that, Austin. That is the heartbeat of Hope. And it is, in many ways, you could simplify it and say, let's bring Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations. We've always had a global mission. And don't forget to teach everything that Jesus commanded. So let's turn a couple pages earlier and let's look at Matthew 25. And let's realize that the King has a lot to say about the way that we care for the least of these. And so let's be people who live out Matthew 28 and Matthew 25. Let's not believe that we are called to bifurcate our life between those two invitations that we have and we see so clearly in the life and resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's really, I think it just hits on exactly what you're talking about. It's like you can't divorce the Great Commission from the Great Commandment. We must love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind, love our neighbor as ourselves. And as we're doing that, we make disciples. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture. So for people that haven't heard of microfinance, can you unpack that a little bit? A lot of our listeners are going to be a little bit more attuned to what traditional finance is. You invest in companies or make loans to corporations, but what's the difference between that and microfinance?
Ted, maybe the simplest way to describe it is to say, when you're growing up, aren't you glad that you had a place to save your money? Aren't you glad you had a savings account and started learning the importance of give, save, and then spend the rest? Aren't you glad you had that? When you get a little older, if you're an entrepreneur, aren't you glad you had someone who encouraged you? And aren't you glad you had someone, whether it was a bank or a family member, that was willing to take the risk at investing in you? And then you get a little older, aren't you glad that you could get a mortgage to have a home? Aren't you glad that you had insurance so that when something happened to you, we're just trying to take what you and I have access to that we probably don't think a lot about and say, who are the people in the world that do not have that same access? And let's provide that to them. So we provide safe places for people to save their money. And this might sound counterintuitive, but we actually don't think an investment into someone before they have something going is a good investment. We think that when you start taking investment capital, that is ideal when you are scaling up. So we help individuals form small groups, start saving together, growing and studying God's word together. And then over time, as these micro enterprises get a little bit more scale, providing investment capital for them that are uncollateralized loans, but we have a 98% repayment rate. So it shows the poor are creditworthy in that. And then to help them scale and offer other services as they grow that, again, you and I have enjoyed They have taken our risk. They have allowed us to have a return on our labor and capital. And we just think there's a lot of labor around the world that does not have access to capital. Let's bring that together and let's do it in such a way that the church is at the center. And let's see what happens. And again, our great journey, and we did not come up with this model, but it really does show just because someone is born in poverty does not mean they have less ability, does not mean that they have fewer dreams. It does not mean that they have less of a desire to care for their kids. It just means they were born in a very different context. So let's discover together what God has gifted them, and let's discover what happens when we partner together, not doing for, but doing with other individuals that, again, born in very different circumstances, but a lot more in common than what sometimes we might initially believe.
Yeah.
So Peter, as you get into this and as you set up savings groups and as you start to provide these services, where is it that you begin to talk a little bit more about some of the biblical teaching? What does it look like as you have people come alongside and start to share some of the biblical principles related to money or, other parts of life?
The short answer is that actually happens before we even talk about savings and loans and all of that. It is foundational. It is truly foundational. So in our church-centered savings group ministry model, the way that we do is we have partnerships with denominations, and then we find local churches that are the courageous ones that are willing to go first. And it really starts with a training. We call it the House of Principles, that really we believe are these principles that are necessary for group cohesion, are necessary for groups to gather together, and are necessary for trust to be built in them. And it is all the teachings of Jesus. And isn't it interesting just how much Jesus had to teach us about the way we interact with each other, the way that we interact with business, the way that we interact with our money? There is a lot to explore. And then out of that, individuals start saving together. And again, we try to keep everything real simple at Hope, but when these groups gather, they go through these 5 W's of welcome, worship, word, work, and wrap up. So essentially, it's like a small group experience with also this savings component and investing in each other's enterprises. And so that's a model. But the short answer is it literally from day one, from the very beginning, it is woven. And the crazy thing is we believe that it is true. And we believe if you practice what Jesus tells us, your life will be so much better on that. It will help the way that you grow your businesses. It will help, not hinder, in this. And we are unapologetic that we are an organization centered on Christ, centered on the teachings of Jesus, and addressing not just principles of economic development, but we want everyone to grow in their relationship with Christ.
And so it sounds like as you reach out, from the first moment, you're working with a local church there who you're really kind of equipping in some deeper ways to be able to help shepherd their congregation through these savings groups. Are we gathering that right?
Yeah, and this is one of the most enjoyable things. I think, we were together not long ago, and right before that, I had just returned from El Salvador. And one of the things that I love about my job is meeting our church partners. And for all of them, the way that they describe, this is a tool that instead of inviting people into the church on a Sunday morning, we now are being invited into the marketplace Monday through Friday in this. And these groups are a powerful tool, a door opener, and churches see that. They recognize this. This is being used for church planning. It's being used to invite others in. And when I was in El Salvador, the math is pretty incredible. Initially, it was 8 individuals that formed this group. Next time, when they finished their cycle and wanted to do it again, there were 23 that were ready to go. And then that one group turned into 5 groups in that over a very short period of time. So it is replicable. It is possible for this model for individuals to see, wait a minute, there's something different about the way that they love and support each other. There's something different about their economic activity, the way they're able to provide for themselves and their families. I want to learn more on that. And the invitations to go out as individuals are being a blessing to their community and as they're putting these principles into practice. Yeah. So it's a wonderful invitation. It's wonderful to help equip local churches to be outward focused in service to their community. And the great irony is that just is this winsome apologetic for the gospel right now as well.
So as you partner with churches, you're putting these biblical principles in place. You're helping teach, you're helping engage. And with the savings group, it sounds like you're helping put together this kind of scaffolding, this structure where people can come together. And it sounds like they start to save first, and they have a group together. And then from what we could gather there, you would have them have progressive opportunities to be able to make decisions about loans of those resources to different people within the group who may need to expand their business. Is that kind of how things work? Or can you walk us through kind of how a savings group emerges and helps people kind of along that path of entrepreneurship?
The way that I wish I could answer that question was to say, let's go right now and let's go participate in one of those groups together. Come join us on a trip. Let's go see it together, because that really is the best way. We also do have a small group experience that I'm super excited about, where people can step into the lives of the families that we serve. And so it's called the Discovering Hope Experience. And it is so much fun. It is so much fun to actually see how that works in practicality. So that's what I'd love to invite you into. But you're exactly right. It's these groups that are gathering together. And as they gather together, they become the underwriting committee. They become the ones that are saving together. And then it is their savings. And they are the ones that make the determination of who in their group is going to receive that investment capital as it grows. And the great thing is, who gets the return on that? There's an interest that's charged most of the time. That means that all of the group is getting the benefit of that business. They're taking the risk and they're getting the reward. And so it's really, sometimes we overcomplicate banking, but it is the accumulation of capital and then the selection process of who is going to use those funds wisely to earn more. And the shareholders benefit from that. And we just do that at the most micro level possible. So in some ways, banking has been around for thousands of years. We're just trying to bring it to people that have not had the ability to take advantage of these simple tools of saving, investing, and launching small. It's truly micro enterprises to start. They don't stay small all the time. And over time, they grow and more capital is required and more investment is made, and super fun to see it grow.
It's fantastic. Well, and it was fun to hear as well, one of the questions as we gathered together a few weeks ago, how this differs, from the way that we think about things in the West. And it was fun to hear you and Judah talk about the communal nature, of the clients that you serve in the developing world, and how, these savings groups, there's a level of accountability, they're among the group, and there's a level of engagement maybe with each other that's a little bit deeper than what we would typically see in our individualized, kind of Western worldview here. Can you talk a little bit about, the power that you see, in that connection, among the clients that you serve?
Yeah, foundational is trust. And in this group, you have to have a group of 10 to 20 of your neighbors that you trust, that are going to be willing to gather together every week or every other week to go through this process. I think we have a lot to learn from the developing world about friendship and knowing your neighbors and being this is next level. Can you imagine? Who would you choose? You're 10 people that you're going to gather together, and it's not just your small group, but then you're going to start pooling your capital and investing in each other. And that's the model. And so it requires more of a communal versus individual perspective. It requires the habit and discipline to gather together on that. So yeah, trust is foundational, no doubt about it, in this work.
Can you talk a little bit about also one of the things that was so fun to hear was the trust then that is taken from the group, but also put into the church, there, in that, when something bad happens, they know who to reach out to. People within that group know who to reach out to. And it's maybe first their colleagues or their friends in the savings group, but then second, they're reaching out to the church and some of the things that you've done and just positioning the church to be, that shepherding, that counseling, all those different pieces. Can you unpack some of what that looks like in terms of just being able to love people well?
Yeah, we imagine communities around the world where the church is relevant to day-to-day decisions and the core of community. And I read about the early church in Acts chapter 2, and I see a group of people that were devoted to learning more about Jesus, were devoted to each other, and were extremely committed to each other and generosity, especially those who had needs. And I just say, I think that what we read in Acts chapter 2, what would happen if that were true today? What would happen if that still described the church in that? And I think we would see some amazing work, amazing things happen in our world, in our day and time. And yeah, so that's really it. It's a church that is outward focused. It's a church that is inviting people into relationship with God and with each other. It's a place where you are known and are invited into this idea about how do we apply the teachings of Jesus to the work that we do. And the crazy thing is, I really do believe these principles, they apply to you and me as well. They apply here as well. And you kind of look at all the stats of the rise of loneliness and all of the harm. And I think we have a wonderful invitation to say, let's rediscover other-centered relationships. Let's rediscover a church that is not just a gathering place on Sunday, but a gathering community throughout the week where we show up for each other in our moments of need and in the opportunities that we have. So anyway, I get super excited when I learn from the global church, see the way that they are living, and I, in many ways, want to try to emulate that in my own home church here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania as well.
Yeah, Peter, as you were talking, even before you mentioned the early church, I just kept hearing, resonance of the early church in this model of we're going to share the resources with one another. And I think, oftentimes people in the West especially get maybe uncomfortable is the best word to put it with that early church model of there was communal nature and people brought what they had into the storehouse and then the apostles divided it out as they saw need. And we look at that and we're uncomfortable, but then on the flip side, in Acts 4, it talks about there was not a needy person among them. And that's something that's, I think, just been really striking for us. So I'd love to hear, do you have any stories from the field about these savings groups that you would want to share?
Oh, that's opening up a dangerous question, Austin. I mean, all kinds of questions, but, the one that to me stands out, part of the reason it stands out because it seemed so small and so insignificant when they started, but it was a group of 23 women that started saving 10 cents a week. And $2.30, that is a waste of time, right? It most certainly was not, though, because it's not just about the economic component of it. It's about hope for the future. It's about dreaming. It's about planning. It's about relationship with each other. It's about praying for each other and all these other things that the group gathered together, and they supported each other and started meeting needs as they had, caring for each other and each other's kids in that. And then, they didn't stay at 10 cents a week, though. Then they started gathering and started doing $1 a week and then $5 and then $10. And over time, when I visited this group, they had started several larger businesses. They were doing flour grinding and then having the farms, and then they had bought a truck to deliver their flour to the different places. And so I got to be in the back of their pickup truck. And this group wanted to make sure I got the tour of the town in that. And they took me to the church that they were building brick by brick in that community. This group, a key part of that church. And then they took me to the schools where they were giving away some of the food in that and helping their kids in their education. And then they took me, and it just was this beautiful sense that you did not see head down and hand up. You saw them standing tall and in a most sincere way. I said, this is amazing. This is amazing. The transformation. And just to see how quick they were to say, we know the one to ultimately say thankful. Thank you to. And just to see their faith, to see their love, to see their relationship with each other, their commitment to Christ and to each other. I was just beautiful. And it started with what I thought would be a waste of time and what could possibly happen from 10 cents a week. So I think of that group. And then also, I think just again, a couple of weeks ago in El Salvador, meeting a group of individuals that started saving together, and then also learning about some regenerative agricultural practices and shifting into practices that cared for the soil, had better yields and more crop diversification, and talking to them about the impact of health on their families, and to talk about the way that now their economics had changed, and to realize individuals have been drawn into the church as a result of this sort of an approach. So yeah, anyway, I could go on, Austin. That's a dangerous question. I love telling stories of the people that we are so privileged to serve.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing at least that one. I think, when we think about deploying capital, when we think about being generous givers, we call this podcast the Second Half Stewardship Podcast, because we want people to be really generous stewards of all of the resources that God has given us. And, you hear these stories of, okay, where can you mobilize capital in the West to really have an impact? And you think about, okay, $2.30. Where can that go? Just like you were saying. And then to see that impact, I think that's one of the beautiful things about Hope is you can really see that impact both financially, because you're seeing these groups rise up and you're getting these incredible stories, but also what their impact in their community, the beauty of these women's lives that have been incredibly transformed by the gospel, by community. It's such an incredible story to hear. So thanks for sharing those two. If you found this episode valuable, share it with a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you don't miss the next episode.
This content was provided by Second Half Stewardship. We are in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you can visit our website at www.secondhalfstewardship.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents.